The final chord in the long, half-century story of USS Nimitz is already echoing across the Pacific. After 50 years of service, countless deployments, and a legacy carved into modern naval warfare, the legendary American supercarrier is now beginning its last voyage, a transition from an active symbol of U.S. power to a vessel headed for decommissioning and eventual dismantling. As Nimitz quietly leaves the stage, an uncomfortable question arises: where is its replacement, and what does this gap mean for the balance of power at sea? USS Nimitz, CVN 68, the lead ship of its class, departed Pearl Harbor and is now heading toward the U.S. mainland for a sequence of final stops. First San Diego, then Bremerton, Washington, where the Navy plans to begin the formal inactivation process in 2026. This is the same place where generations of sailors trained, deployed, and returned from missions around the world, missions that transformed Nimitz from just another nuclear-powered hull into a legend of the Cold War, post-9/11 world, and modern great power competition. With this last deployment, the ship is not only completing a journey, but closing an era. Its final operational cruise began back in March, when Nimitz sailed into the vast Indo-Pacific, today the most strategically contested region on the planet. Operating under U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, the carrier group conducted missions across the South China Sea, engaging in deterrence patrols and joint exercises designed to signal that American naval presence remains steady despite growing regional tensions. Even in its final year, Nimitz was doing what it had always done, projecting power where it mattered most. But the Indo-Pacific was not its only destination. In the spring and summer, as missile exchanges between Iran and Israel escalated, the U.S. rushed additional naval assets to the Middle East. Nimitz was among them. The ship reinforced regional posture, then took over duties from USS Carl Vinson, allowing the latter to return home after 8 months at sea. This final deployment encapsulated everything Nimitz represented: mobility, deterrence, and the ability to respond globally, sometimes within days. To understand the magnitude of the moment, it's worth remembering that USS Nimitz was laid down in 1968 and commissioned in 1975. It has served longer than many of today's sailors have been alive. It took part in operations ranging from Eagle Claw in 1979 to 1980, to Desert Fox in 1999, to Iraqi Freedom in 2003. It even became an unexpected cultural icon in 2004, when its crew encountered what would later be known as the Tic Tac UFO. Few military platforms can claim such a broad, strange, and impactful career. Yet even a nuclear-powered supercarrier has limits. The technologies of the 1970s are now outdated. The ship requires intense maintenance, and sustaining a 50-year-old hull is no longer strategic or economical. The Navy knew this moment was coming. It began planning for Nimitz's disposal back in 2023, because dismantling a nuclear supercarrier is a monstrously complex and expensive task. If the experience of USS Enterprise is any indication, still not fully disposed of after 6 years, the process will take almost as long as one of Nimitz's full-service cycles. The natural successor is the USS John F. Kennedy, CVN 79, the second carrier of the Gerald R. Ford class. But here lies the uncomfortable strategic wrinkle: Kennedy will not enter service until 2027. That means that for roughly 2 years, the United States will field only 10 operational carriers instead of 11. On paper, this doesn't undermine American naval dominance. In reality, it narrows the Navy's flexibility at a time when global demands on U.S. carrier strike groups are expanding, not shrinking. The Indo-Pacific alone could absorb multiple full-time carrier deployments, especially with China building out its own blue water fleet. And this is where the geopolitical context becomes impossible to ignore. China recently commissioned its third aircraft carrier and is already constructing 2 more, one of which may become the world's largest by deck area if current assessments are accurate. While Chinese carriers still lag in technology, doctrine, and experience, the quantity trend is unmistakable: Beijing is trying to close the gap. In raw numbers, China's Navy has already surpassed the United States. In tonnage and true power projection capability, it remains far behind, but the trajectory is what concerns strategists. The comparison becomes clearer when looking at displacement. Every American supercarrier displaces over 100,000 tons. China's current largest carriers weigh in at around 60,000 to 85,000 tons. That difference translates into the number of aircraft, sortie rates, fuel capacity, combat endurance, and survivability. On a one-to-one basis, a U.S. carrier outclasses its Chinese counterpart by a wide margin. But Beijing isn't aiming for one-to-one superiority, it's aiming for regional saturation. Combined with land-based anti-ship missiles and expanding naval aviation, China is steadily reshaping its maritime posture. Which brings us back to the question, how much does losing Nimitz matter? On one level, the U.S. Navy will still possess the world's most powerful carrier fleet. On another, the temporary reduction to 10 carriers introduces strain. Every ship will deploy more frequently. Maintenance cycles tighten. Crews endure longer rotations. In a world where hotspots stretch from the Persian Gulf to the Taiwan Strait, losing even one operational hull impacts strategic pacing. Nimitz's departure also highlights the slow transition toward the Ford-class design. These new carriers promise better sortie generation, electromagnetic launch systems, reduced crew requirements, and life cycle savings. But they also face integration challenges, delays, and escalating costs. The long-planned leap into next-generation naval aviation is turning out to be more complicated than anticipated. As a result, the Navy finds itself in a narrow bridge period, phasing out the old before the new is fully ready. For viewers following military affairs, this is not just the story of one ship but a moment of structural change. The end of Nimitz symbolizes the end of an era when American naval dominance seemed unchallenged and uncontested. The future will be more competitive, more technologically complex, and more dependent on rapid adaptation. The U.S. still leads, but maintaining that lead will require strategic discipline, investment, and innovation. As USS Nimitz begins its quiet final journey to Bremerton, it carries with it 50 years of history, operations, crises, triumphs, failures, and thousands of sailors whose lives were shaped aboard its decks. But even as one chapter closes, another begins. The next generation of carriers is coming, and the global balance of power at sea is entering a new phase. Whether the United States navigates the transition smoothly will define the naval landscape for decades to come.